Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 3 of season 5 of Babylon 5, the Paragon of Animals. The requirement to sign the Declaration of Principles of the Interstellar Alliance is causing problems for the Drazi in particular, as they say you can't legislate for morality. Garibaldi mimes a gun to his head to Sheridan out of sight of the ambassadors just before they march out of the council chamber. In the rotunda, Sheridan tells Garibaldi that Londo wants to drop the declaration, and to his surprise, Garibaldi doesn't disagree. Sheridan wants the Alliance to stand for something right from the start, but Garibaldi feels that the only way he's going to pull it together is for Sheridan to use force at some point, because that's all they respect right now. Morality can come later, but this period is critical to the future of the Alliance. On an unknown world, alien civilians are being bombed by assault ships as they huddle in shelters when a ranger is brought into the shelter, and with him, hope that the Alliance will intervene on their behalf. On the station, the advisory group is trying to hash out food shipments for one Alliance member, with the Pakmarar being a possible source. Meanwhile, Jakar is intent on tweaking the declaration to try and make it more acceptable to the Drazi, whilst Londo is in need of a fleet of drinks to get through the next 5 minutes. Finally, Mr. Garibaldi gets the chance to speak he's been waiting for, despite knowing Sheridan isn't going to love his idea. He notes that reports from the Rangers are good, but they could be better with the use of one more resource: telepaths. Every other race bar the Narn, who have none, and Earth, where cycle rules dictate they can't be used in the military, use telepaths in a military role. He wants to use the colony telepaths on the station to fill that gap, because they're not limited by cycle rules. Sheridan had intended to keep them in reserve in the event conflict breaks out between mundanes and telepaths, but Garibaldi persuades him to at least let him have a conversation with them, given they've announced they're willing to work to pay their way, having been given a place to stay. Sheridan grudgingly gives permission. The meeting does not go well. In fact, the opposite of well, because Byron knows exactly what arguments and counter-arguments Garibaldi is going to use, not because he scanned him, but because he broadcasts his thoughts so widely without even knowing he's doing it. Byron notes that he likes to have figured out all the ways a conversation will go before it starts, which he thinks will have ended many of his relationships in the past. Consequently, while Byron confirms they do indeed want to work, they will not do so for other organisations like the Psi Corps or the Alliance. They will work only for themselves. He also notes the irony of Garibaldi complaining about scanning without authorisation, when that was exactly what he came here to ask them to do on his behalf, a long way from the moral high ground. The local jump gate activates and a white star comes through. Barely. Massively damaged, it requests emergency docking. The one ranger we see is mortally wounded and has slipped into coma. Franklin can do nothing to save him. Delenn concludes they need a telepath, whether or not the result could be used in a court. And so Lita arrives for what is inevitably a near-death scan, which is always difficult for a telepath, but sees through the ranger's eyes to hear the story of the Enfili, a simple people with a rich world that they cannot defend from raiders themselves. The raiders come twice a year to pillage their resources, but this time they have hidden what they seek, and so in 12 days they will come back in force. What the raiders take, they wish to give freely to the Alliance, but need their help to stop the raiders before they are destroyed. The ranger appears to Lita beside his own body, hoping that his death will now have meaning, as he steps towards something resembling a white jump gate vortex in the doorway and moves into its centre. Franklin declares him dead. Sheridan and Delenn discuss the situation with the Enfili, whose world is on the edge of Drazi space. They realise that, somewhat ironically in light of recent events, their declaration obliges them to go to the aid of the Enfili. Sheridan was hoping to avoid a firefight this early on, but it seems one has found them. Jakar and Londo have agreed that they need to intervene, with Londo enjoying the irony as he's in favour of ditching the declaration. Sheridan notes that they are going in blind against an enemy capable of trashing a white star, which suggests superior firepower or numbers, or, as Delenn notes, both. So Sheridan is uncertain as to how many to send in. Delenn's suggestion follows a lesson learned from Ducat. Terror is also a form of speech. So send as many white stars as they can spare, and in doing so, they might avoid a fight altogether. Sheridan wholeheartedly agrees and orders the entire fleet to a staging area before then attending a meeting with the Drazi ambassador to give him a heads up on the operation. After Sheridan leaves his quarters, the ambassador also leaves, and we see Byron in shot briefly. Garibaldi now goes to see Lita, hoping to give her a new job. She is not, however, in talkative mood. He knows she scanned the Ranger, but doesn't know she was in his mind when he died. She says that no one should see that door open, that moment, other than the person who's dying. When you do, a part of your soul goes with that person. She's done it twice. She's seen telepaths who've done it just a few more times, and they're not the same people anymore. Vacant. Rumour has it that Bester was always hunting for near-death scans, that he wanted to know what was beyond, and that one time he pushed it so far that the best part of himself got lost and didn't come back. So when he finally manages to ask her to intercede with Byron on his behalf, she initially sees nothing wrong with Byron's rejection of his request. Garibaldi doesn't give up and pleads with her to help Glenn and the others to try and get the Alliance off the ground. She slowly acquiesces and agrees to go and see Byron. In the council chambers, G'Kar is still writing before finally collecting his papers and leaving. Sheridan cannot sleep and gets out of bed before moving to answer his door chime. He finds no one but a scroll, and as Delenn joins him as he was wondering whether they're doing the right thing with the Infili, he finds the scroll contains a revised opening to G'Kar's original Declaration of Principles, essentially saying that although we have many languages, we all speak with the same voice and are one, and we should be kind to one another. Lita meets with Byron one-to-one, and initially he seems almost hostile towards her, telling her to sit, then knocking the chair away. But he's done so to make a point that she's become used to taking orders rather than being treated decently. This time he asks her to sit. He notes that she's been keeping all of them out, and she says it's been that way for a while now. He views them, as better than simple humans who prey on another, the paragon of animals. He does not want them to be used as inquisitors, bloodhounds, murderers. Yet for her, she says it matters to her. He will assign 2 telepaths to Mr. Garibaldi to find out all the dark hidden secrets he seeks. She says it does matter, and as a down payment on his promise, he offers her the thoughts of the Drazi ambassador that he was broadcasting earlier. The White Stars are heading into a trap, which will result in their destruction and the deaths of all those they sought to protect. Lita relays the information to Sheridan and Garibaldi. The Drazi will not rendezvous with the White Stars, but attack them, whilst the raiders they have backed to plunder and subdue their border worlds will destroy the Infili to remove witnesses. The Drazi take a share of what the raiders take. All this contrary to a statement the Drazi made when arguing against the declaration that they do not enslave others. Perhaps not, but they do have others do it for them. And so Sheridan orders the White Stars to burn onto the Infili planet and take up defensive positions. He thanks Lita for saving lives before he leaves the room, to her mild surprise. As the traditional triangular-shaped raider ships approach the planet, the Infili spokesperson sees what he thought at first was a new star in the sky, but has realised it's a jump point, one of many, as the White Stars come in shooting. In the council chambers, Sheridan has organised a show and tell, particularly aimed at the Drazi. A holographic display illustrates the Infili homeworld, the raiders harassing it destroyed. And to answer the Drazi ambassador's questions, the icons represent White Stars, all of them, standing ready to deal with the larger fleet they believe is imminent, in fulfilment of their promise to protect potential members of the Alliance. Were the Drazi able to go pale, the ambassador would be, as he seeks to leave the meeting. Glenn wonders why he needs to, surely it can wait. Ultimately, Sheridan demands the truth from him and he crumbles. Yes, the incoming fleet is theirs, and yes, they've been harassing the Infili for a decade. He desperately wants to get his fleet turned around, saying hundreds of lives are at stake, to which Sheridan retorts that the Infili have lost thousands of lives. But he allows him to leave. An open comms channel has been prepared in the next room. Sheridan uses this push to get the other races to sign the revised declaration, as Lita looks in on proceedings and moves on. Sheridan sits with his feet up, completed declarations all around, savouring the moment, but Glenn notes if he's celebrating he ought to be smiling. Unfortunately, he's realised Mr. Garibaldi is right, because telepaths got them out of 2 situations they otherwise would not have seen coming. Just then, G'Kar bounces in, collecting the signed declarations up into a bag, declaring they have to get signed again because he's done another rewrite, which Sheridan does indeed acknowledge as being better. As G'Kar heads out, Sheridan returns to telepaths. He knows full well that going down this road is a slippery slope, and they'll have to be very careful. And down below, Lita returns to Byron and asks to hear more of his ideas. Whilst there's a fair amount of telepath focus in this episode, it's also a clear example of the sort of difficulties the ISA is going to face in establishing itself. And of course those difficulties are far from limited to the station, as we see a whole new world in this episode with a return to the White Star Fleet in action, even if more implied than seen. Garibaldi's encounter with Byron's group goes exactly as you would expect it to realistically. Again, I draw the Serenity parallel. Don't put the head of your covert ops in a room with a telepath, let alone a room with a whole colony of them, because they are going to see every secret you've got if they choose to. So trust is absolutely critical, and Byron makes it clear that as a mundane working for an organisation seeking to use telepaths for its own ends, Garibaldi is never going to make his Christmas card list. Garibaldi then compounds this by utterly failing to assess Lita's mood as he sits down to try and get her to do his dirty work for him. Granted, Bester will have left a bad taste in his mouth as Psychor goes, even more so than before, but this is Lita he's talking to, and he should be more respectful. Their exchange just highlights for us how far away from understanding one another mundanes and telepaths can be, which of course is very much Bester's attitude. So, although he manages to win her around, the result of which is her and Byron saving the day, the knock-on effect is that Byron has made an impact on her, and she wants to hear more of what he has to say. What that will mean for Lita's future allegiance, if anything, remains to be seen. On the other side of the coin, we have the Declaration of Principles, and just what that commits the Interstellar Alliance to, even to the point of having the White Stars open up on ships from a race that, as the Drazi points out, fought in the Shadow War, and in so doing helped the Alliance to come into being. What the Drazi ambassador fails to understand is that while Sheridan is new to the diplomat game, he's no stranger to it, or to making his point clear, at the barrel of a gun when necessary. As his dad taught him, don't start a fight but always finish one. He would have had no choice but to eliminate the Drazi fleet if engaged, particularly as the numbers of White Stars are finite. Jakar getting to at least version 3 of the Declaration isn't an entertaining sideline amongst all of this, of course, as well. Now, I noticed last episode that his temples seem to be much lighter than they have been in the past, and I noticed it again this episode, so I don't know if that's a conscious thing on the part of the costume department, but it seems curious to me. Even more curious than my not having noticed it before now, but see what you think. One puzzling thing I noticed was that when Sheridan ordered the White Star fleet to the rendezvous, there were shed loads of them right next to the station already. I'm not entirely clear why that was, apart from the obvious visual appeal, but just maybe with Sheridan and Delenn there, they choose to mass those not on patrol at the station. I don't know. We are certainly in a different set of circumstances to where we were previously, and the Rangers have no real need to be clandestine at this point. I should also just say that I rather like the Infili, although we didn't learn a huge amount about them. Whilst they were clearly portrayed as the bullied in this episode, we saw enough of them numbers-wise to believe they were a real community in peril, and they came across as a very sincere, if downtrodden people who had not yet given up hope. So the Rangers' sacrifice in getting their message out did feel worthwhile, and of course allowed the events of the episode to play out. And while Sheridan doesn't make the point, it's worth noting that a telepath also saved the day in the first episode of this season. Plus, of course, all the times Lita has stepped into the breach. So you can see that they really are getting a rough deal quite a lot of the time, because those that are free and are often forces for good, rather than pinching your credit card details. I find myself mildly surprised to have written a relatively short look at this episode, but it occurs to me that there is a shift in the dynamic here, because we've had so many episodes packed with Shadow War and Earth Civil War plotlines in the last season. You notice here the lack of major plotlines happening at this point, and so the relative scarcity of big action in the episodes. I can't really look back into loads of past episodes as might have been the case earlier, all of which is a knock-on of Season 4 getting relatively compacted to complete major arcs in good time. So whilst JMS clearly had other arcs planned, this is Babylon 5 decompressed and taking its time like it did in the first couple of seasons. In fact, the emphasis on the station is, as I've already noted, very reminiscent of going back to the show's beginnings, albeit with the crew in radically different positions. So although we've now had several references to telepath mundane conflict, it's far from clear where we might go with that at this stage, and nor is it obvious how much more focus there will be on the early days of the Interstellar Alliance or other issues. You'll notice there was no Lockley at all in this episode, despite it being her station. Indeed, I'm struggling to recall if she appeared in the previous episode, but then she had no history with Londo herself. The focus still seems to be on Sheridan and Delenn as the heads of the Alliance rather than on the station. I don't know if that would throw newcomers off at all, but it's perfectly natural from the old-timers' point of view, of course. The other thing that's just occurred to me, thinking about Lockley, is that she doesn't seem to have an obvious second with Ivanova no longer being around. And you notice that's an elephant in the room too. No one has discussed how they feel about her not being around. Short of Franklin, there's no one left who's Earth Force unless you consider Corwin or perhaps Zack. In some respects it's just more of the same, but in others it almost feels like they rebooted the show early. JMS, ever the trendsetter. So I think that's about it for this episode. 2 episodes in 2 days from my point of view. It won't last. Catch you for the next one.